Have you ever looked at economic predictions and just thought, something's off here? Why do they always seem to be describing a world of super rational robots instead of, actual people? Well, today we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating mystery, a 250-year-old mistake that sits at the very heart of modern economics. And what it tells us about how our minds really work is incredible.
This quote right here from economist Bruno Frey basically says it all. This is the core idea, the bedrock assumption that traditional economics has been built on for centuries. This is their model of a person, a perfectly logical being that some people started calling econs. They're always calculating, totally self-interested, and what they want today, they'll want tomorrow. Super consistent.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't, right? And when psychologists like Daniel Kahneman first heard this definition, they were just floored. Because the people they study, real, living, breathing humans, are nothing like that. It's almost as if economics and psychology were studying two completely different species.
And this right here is the massive disconnect. Econs are these flawless logic machines that only exist in theory. But us, humans, well, we're not always rational, we can be really generous, and our tastes can change in a heartbeat. We take shortcuts, we have biases. This huge gap between the econ and the human is where our story really gets going.
Okay, so to really understand the mistake, we first have to appreciate just how brilliant the original theory was. We've got to go way back to the 18th century and meet a mathematician named Daniel Bernoulli. He was tackling a huge puzzle. How do people actually make decisions when there's risk involved? And he came up with a really, really smart answer.
So before Bernoulli, everyone was thinking in terms of expected value. A 50-50 shot at winning $1,000 was worth, well, $500. Simple math. But Bernoulli realized, wait a minute, that's not how our minds actually work. He brought in this idea of expected utility. He said we don't make choices based on pure dollar amounts, but on the subjective psychological value, the happiness those dollars bring us.
And this table shows his core idea perfectly. It's called diminishing marginal utility. So look, if you have $1 million, getting another million is a huge boost to your happiness, right? We'll call it 20 points of utility. But if you already have $9 million, that same extra million, it barely moves the needle. It only adds like 4 points of happiness. The takeaway is simple. The more you have, the less each extra dollar feels like it's worth. And that explains why most of us tend to be risk-averse.
Bernoulli's theory was a total game changer. It perfectly explained why someone with less money would happily pay for insurance to avoid a big loss, while a rich person could afford to take on that risk. It was simple, it was powerful, and it became the foundation of economic thinking for almost 300 years. It really seemed perfect.
But here's the thing, it wasn't perfect. For all its brilliance, Bernoulli's theory had this one massive, fatal blind spot. And what's wild is that we can expose this flaw with just a couple of really simple thought experiments. So, according to Bernoulli's theory, the answer here has to be yes. They both have $5 million today, so they should have the same amount of utility, the same level of happiness. But we know intuitively that's completely wrong. Jack is on cloud 9. He just quadrupled his money. And Jill is absolutely devastated. She just lost almost half of hers. Their happiness isn't about their current state of wealth, it's about the change from where they started.
All right, let's push this idea a little further with another scenario. We've got Anthony and Betty. Now, according to Bernoulli, they're facing the exact same choice because the potential outcomes, ending up with $1 million or $4 million, are identical for both of them. Their starting points shouldn't make a difference, so they should make the same choice. But do they? Not a chance. Just look at how differently they see the exact same choice. For Anthony, who starts with $1 million, the sure thing means he doubles his wealth. That's an amazing guaranteed gain. He's probably going to take that deal. But for Betty, starting with $4 million, that same sure thing is a guaranteed loss of half her wealth. That's a terrible outcome. When she's choosing between a sure awful loss and a gamble where she might lose nothing, she's way more likely to roll the dice.
The stories of Jack, Jill, Anthony, and Betty all point to the one massive thing that Bernoulli's beautiful theory just completely missed. The key isn't the final amount of money you have. It's all about where you started.
And this is the missing piece, the reference point. You see, our brains don't really think in absolute terms. We are wired to compare. Is a room hot or cold? Well, that depends on if you just came in from a snowstorm or a sauna. The same is true for wealth. We're always comparing to our neutral starting point.
This is the key insight. We are hardwired to see the world in terms of gains and losses, not absolute levels. Anthony's brain is processing a gain, Betty's is processing a loss. Jack is celebrating a huge gain while Jill is mourning a terrible loss. And this idea became the core of a revolutionary new theory called prospect theory.
So that brings us to the final, and maybe the deepest question of all. If this flaw is so blindingly obvious once you see it, why did it take over 250 years for generations of absolutely brilliant thinkers to spot it?
The answer lies in a really powerful psychological bias that gets all of us, even the smartest people. Daniel Kahneman calls it theory-induced blindness. Basically, when a theory is really elegant and useful, it stops being just an explanation. It becomes the lens through which you see everything.
Here's how it works. A great theory like Bernoulli's becomes the standard way of thinking. So when you see a case that doesn't fit, like Jack and Jill, your first instinct isn't to say, hey, maybe the theory's wrong. No, your instinct is to say, that's just a weird exception, an anomaly. You give the theory the benefit of the doubt, and when you do that, you become blind to its biggest, most basic flaws.
And that really brings us to the big takeaway here. The story of Bernoulli's mistake isn't just about economics. It's a huge lesson about knowledge itself. It forces us to step back and ask a really important question. What powerful, widely accepted ideas that we use every single day might be shaping our thinking in ways that are blinding us to an even deeper reality?